Hello, everyone. Welcome to Policy Central, a one stop destination for all things policy. It is said a constitution is not a parchment of paper, but it is a way of life. And by that, I guess you might have guessed the topic for today's podcast, which is the Constitution of India. And what better day to talk about it but on 26th of November, that is today, which is also known as the Constitution Day of India, formerly known as the Law Day of India. So, the Constitution of India was adopted, enacted, and given to ourselves on 26 November 1949. And on 26 January 1950, it came into effect when the Union of India became the Republic of India. So, on this occasion, we could not get any better person than our Professor Prithvi Raj to speak on the same, who has a keen interest in constitution and who has a deep study in the same field. So, sir, handing it over to you.
Great, thank you. We all are celebrating Constitution Day, also called as National Law Day, on this day of 26 November. The concept of constitutional autochthony, that means the constitution should be a homegrown entity, started from 1929 onwards. That is after the Lahore session of Indian National Congress in December 1929. Post that, we all know that 1930, 26 January was celebrated as the symbolic first Independence Day. And since then, since 1930 till 1947, 26 January was being celebrated as Independence Day, right? And rightly so, to commemorate the Pune Swaraj Declaration, we do celebrate the Republic Day on 26 January, the 1950, right? So, in this sense, it reflected the aspirations, the demands, requirements of the then society. And as we all know, our constitution is one of the lengthiest constitution in the world. It has 395 articles. Today we have 25 parts and 12 schedules. At the same time, I mean, we did, to accommodate the diverse requirements, the regional diversity, linguistic diversity, to accommodate the diversity of the huge nation like India, we have to have a very lengthy and bulky constitution. In this process, we also took or imbibed many best practices across the world, and we adopted as per the requirements of Indian society and incorporated in our constitution. So in this sense, Indian constitution is the amalgamation of various diversities, various cultures which are being reflected in the constitution, and it is ever evolving and ever growing document. I believe that it is an organic entity. It's like a living plant. I mean, and for that matter, any constitution of the world is a living plant. I mean, if it stops there, if it is not growing, if it is not flexible, then it will die soon.
We definitely created a constitution of our own. It was definitely homegrown. Our people, our lawyers, and political statesmen, they were the ones who were actively involved in it. But when it comes to the content of the constitution, we've borrowed a lot of ideologies, which there is no harm about. But when we talk about India, we talk about the legacy of rules and administrations that we already have. So, do you think when we were making our constitution, we were trying to be very westernized in our ideology or approach, that we forgot ki back home we do have something that dictates the rules
Correct.
and governs the society.
All right.
So, sir, before you throw light on this, I would like to add one more
Sure.
point. It feels like they were kind of divided between either accepting the US model or the UK model, and okay, probably the UK model won. But again, in a continuation to what Gayatri asked, that did we somewhere lose our own Indian ethos?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So
Okay,
like
so-
there's this thing that we were thinking about.
As you say that, is it a blind copy? I would say that no, I would not call it a blind aping of the West. And at the time of independence, I agree that Indian constitution borrows more from the West because we were the colonies of Britain. So I would say that 2/3 of Indian constitution, right, 66% of the Indian constitution is a copy paste of Government of India Act 1935, right? But we must also understand that when India was declared as a republic, both Government of India Act 1935 and India Independence Act 1947, which bestowed independence to our country, got automatically repealed, because now these laws cannot be not applicable to the country, right? But at the same time, the administrative structure that we follow, the administrative systems, the provincial autonomy that we follow, right? The civil services that we have in our country, the federal character that we have, are definitely borrowed from the Western principles. And United States is practicing strict separation of powers, and India lies somewhere in the middle. I mean, we are neither following a strict separation of, possibly we are, walking the path of Buddha, the path of moderation. We are not following either, neither following the strict separation of power nor loose separation of powers, because in India, constitution is supreme. Constitution is a living plant. It's like an organic entity. It grows with the time. What was right, appropriate during during the Britishers' time may not hold true today.
I agree with that. The fact that we're always going through the change, but my the reason why I posed that question was uh, something like the panchayati raj system, or like you mentioned, the local self governance, right? Or at the most basic level, it's not something new to India. It's something we always had. And if you look as far as the Vedic era, if you look, we have the sabhas for discussing administrative affairs and judicial affairs. In fact, that is what distinguishes it from samitis, because samitis were more for philosophical affairs and religious affairs. And there was equal participations with women playing the roles of sabhavatis and a head being elected as sabhapatis. But my question, it's still the fact that, sir, that in 1950s, when we were adopting when we were formulating a constitution per se, it was it when we look in hindsight, does it look like an act to please and try to be most similar to the West, because we were coming out as an identity of our own country? Like you said, from dominion we're going to a republic, right? So we want to be at its relatable best while we come with our own diverse set of rules and regulations, which is why we took ideals from the Russian constitution, from the US, from France, and from UK, where we see very little reflection when I look back, and when we look at the ancient sabhas and every other organization, or from the Mahabharatas as well, that there's very little addition of such administrative structures, even from Kautilya's Arthashastra, which we are so proud of when it talks about king making. But when you look, we don't see it as actively as the other constitutions have made its mark in our constitution. So, have we lost our individuality when we were making a constitution?
I would say that we still retain our individuality, because we must understand that these regions, these places saw the revolutions in a very early stages, right? For example, English Revolution was taking place somewhere around 1660s, 70s, right? Similarly, American Revolution also was so early, 17th century. So, but our case was different. We were colony, the British colony till till the 20th century.
When we were
the mid of
kingdoms
the,
before that.
Yes, and in this sense, we actually enacted our constitution very late, because we got freedom. We were still the colonies, but I would say that still, and in fact, our constitution, when we compare to the other constitution, right, our constitution was very good, or more advanced in that sense that we offered universal adult franchise, adult suffrage, right from the enactment of the constitution. At the same time, the society, Indian society, is much more diverse. I would say it is much more diverse than the Western society. We have regional diversity, religious diversity, then there are linguistic diversity. So we have to accommodate all the diverse stream of thoughts in our constitution. That is the reason when we look into Article 14, which is the right to equality. So we have taken both the positions, that is equality before law as well as equal protection of laws. Right? Equality before law is a UK British concept, which says that law is supreme, and nobody is above law. All are equal in the eyes of law. Right? Whereas we know that the society in India was inherently unequal. Right? So you cannot place tiger and cheetah and elephant on the same starting line, because then we know that who will win the race, right? So therefore we also adopted the principle of equal protection of laws, which is a British American concept, right? In this sense, we embarked with the principle of affirmative actions and so on and so forth.
Which gives
So-
us all the more reason to still retain the fact that when we come with so much of diversity, was it so necessary for us to adopt principles from countries like America or UK that had very in that
Less
linear
diversity.
culture, which was not as extensive as the Indian or the in the Asian subcontinent? Because, like you said, we come with a very diverse background. So moving forward, when we talk about like the constitution, don't you think it is more important for us to draw inspiration from our set of rules and regulations? And of course, with changing times, we do need to change the ideology or whatever. When we talk about the core essence of the constitution, shouldn't really reflect who we are as a country, our value system. Should we really be should we carry forward the legacy of the colonials?
So, sir, I would like to pick up on one point that you mentioned about looking back on culture, and taking inspiration. And I cannot stop but think about, again, Kautilya, who taught India the art of statecraft, right? He taught the king how to be a good king. He taught the king how to maintain foreign relations. The system of spies introduced in Indian culture for the first time. And like that man definitely had a vision. So then I was wondering, what if we just try to analyze contemporary India from a Kautilyan view? Like, if we imagine, okay, Kautilya is looking at us right now and he's thinking, okay, well, how is India doing right now?
Messed up.
So like if we just look at it, Kautilya gave us Saptanga theory, which means the seven.
Prakritis,
Yeah.
based on 7 Prakritis of state, right?
And so the Kautilya talked about the ruler or the Swami, and he said the ruler of the state must be at the highest pedestal. And then he gave the qualities of a king, that is fine. But he said a very interesting thing, something which I personally find very, very interesting, and that is a ruler embodies the state. And how I could be wrong, but how I perceive this statement is basically when our ruler, here we can say our prime minister probably, when he goes out and represents India, how he is seen is how India is seen, right? And which I think the Kautilyan theory of ruler embodies the state kind of makes sense. The fact that India is sitting on the global high table now, India is now not the rule acceptor but a rule maker, is probably because of rulers because of the kind of rulers that we have had, be it Jawaharlal Nehru, who nudged Indian causes, or anyone else. So, and also, okay, so like it's also interesting to realize that our prime minister he's always on the top list of the most desirable leaders, which kind of puts India in the global front page, and Indian needs can be addressed, and that is, I think, really, really great.
Also, it's interesting because they talk about we always wonder, right, when do you separate the person from the office?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
where do you start? And I'm not just talking in context of our beloved prime minister, but just
Anyone.
any person in general, that when you criticize or when you praise a particular move, when do you separate the leader from the post? Is he as an individual who's being able to achieve it, or the office? Because even in that, when you criticize a leader, you're not talking about the failure of that person, definitely the failure of that person in decision making, but also the idea that was executed by the rest, right? That we were the ones who implemented the idea.
Yeah.
So it also talks about the failure of the state if it's not to work. And even when in the global front, if we are talking about the most viral images that always keep circulating on Instagram after every global meet is some leader walking up to Modi and patting him in the back, and
Or
then he'll be
hugging
like,
him, or like Biden was saluting him.
yeah, and then just my most favorite one is Rishi Sunak and Modi just leaning on a chair. It just literally looked like a clip out of a wedding, you know.
In fact, we call the head of the government as Prime Minister, not Supreme Minister.
Supreme Minister.
Yeah.
Fine.
Because he may be the central pillar, but even if one pillar falls, it will lead to the collapse of the tent
whole-
would collapse, right? So we work on the concept of democracy, and in fact, this person talked about this in his beautiful treatise called as Arth Shastra,
Yeah.
right? So he said that for the effective and efficient functioning of the state, there must be proper coordination of these 7 organs, which he calls saptang, right? As we are organs, there should be proper harmony and coordination, and an effective and efficient state would ensure the welfare of the people.
It's a beautiful blend because it follows a vertical, it's very vertical and hierarchy set. At the same time, there is a horizontal amalgamation of all the responsibilities. Because if these don't work in tandem and if these don't work in equal priority, it's a mayhem, right? Everything's just gonna probably just crumble down. Which is why it still makes one wonder that when we have such a beautiful system of state factor and that constitutes what is state power, shouldn't this be our primary driving force for lawmaking?
So, one more thing, if I can add to it, I was reading something, and it works on the Saptanga theory and also on how the Indian governance system works. So, there's a thing called logical verticality, in which you have vertical division of powers, and it has to make sense. Like she said, if the first 6 don't make sense, the last one will crumble. Or if the first few, like the next one won't work out. And then horizontal entanglement.
Yeah.
With the hierarchy, you also need to have a horizontal synergy between all the institutions for an effective governance system. And like this is like a small bit that I wanted to add it because I read that somewhere. And of course, we need to be a little academic. So why not?
Okay.
Yeah.
So, with the discussion so far, when we think as policymakers or lawmakers, or when we think about a regulation in general, what exactly should the constitution of today look for for India? Because we are clearly moved away from the Nehruvian times. See, we've gone from the socialist ideology to the Manmohan Singh's accept it all ideology, globalization, opening up everything, and now we're coming to an Atmanirbhar stage where we're talking about self-reliance. Whatever it is going to come from us, right? So when we are talking about that kind of a governance style, what should our constitution look at?
The changing requirements also, compelled maybe the government to touch upon various other areas of the constitution. For example, there was no legal constitutional status given to the local self-government institutions at the villages as well as the cities, which was lately given only in the year 1992 by 73rd and 74th Amendment Act. Right. Today, there are many reforms which are required into the constitution, and in fact, many commissions and the committees have already been constituted. So, I would say that constitution is always a growing entity. It's like a floating water,
or like a tree.
If it's like a river, right? And if it has to flow. I mean, it has to flow, and we cannot even imagine, the India 100 years after this. Imagine, 100 years post this, there would be completely different set of challenges.
Probably we'll need a law for flying cars or a new traffic law,
and
something like that.
Today we do have legislation for privacy. We do have legislation for the data protection.
Cyber laws for some reason.
Cyber laws.
Just
Today we have laws for transgender community. So in this sense, I mean, those were not declared as a crime in British times. Section 377 was a crime, right? So in this sense, constitution has to be always flexible, and every constitution is flexible. But if any one person tries to overpower, then it would be the death of the constitution and in fact the death of the nation.
So I think it holds true to the fact that India's constitution moving forward, the constitution at its very core needs to stay constant because it is the very foundation of our country. But at the same time, what constitutes the constitution may evolve. I wouldn't say change, but evolve over time, because we always learn from what's going on around us, and we learn the right and wrong from our morals, our ethics, and it's an never-ending process. So may what constitute the constitution change, but not the constitution in its very itself.
Great.
So,
and, as sir very, very rightly and beautifully mentioned, that constitution is kind of like a river that keeps flowing. So, like, we would like to end our episode on a note that let's our constitution never dry up and let us keep evolving over time.